Ram Dass didn't stop doing psychedelics entirely. I think it's just, he found a way to, instead of going up and down, found a way to make it sort of more of a lateral exploration. If you're doing all of this, intense sadhana and have a deep connection to spirit outside of psychedelics, it makes the use of it, much more gentle.
Yeah, and much more integrated, really. Hey everyone, this is Raghu, and I'm back with another Mindrolling, and I wanted to just say a little bit about this upcoming episode. It's with Zach Leary, who is Tim Leary's son, and who is very much a part of our greater ramdass family, and is been pretty dedicated to the ongoing work of how psychedelics can enhance our lives through the kinds of therapy that are being experimented with PTSD and addiction and death and dying, and it's proving to be extremely effective. So Zach does a podcast for MAPS, which is the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, and they're the ones who are at the leading edge of getting these great therapies legalized. And it's really close. And they just did a huge convening in Denver that we were at. That was just quite impressive, all the kind of work that is being done to really enhance the effectiveness of psychedelics in treatment. And of course, there's the other aspect where Ram Dass was very involved with using psychedelics for inner exploration. And he said at one time, without that, he would not have been able to really completely grok, which is an old word, meaning totally insightfully understanding Maharaji, who Neem Karoli Baba was when he met him. So Zach wanted to. We agreed to do a podcast together, and we agreed, why not put it out on both of our channels? And we talked a lot about Ram Dass, a lot about the psychedelic work that he's so involved with, and I thought, wow, this is a great thing to share. So that is what you'll be listening to coming up here in a moment. I just want to mention one other thing that's also fabulous, and that is we, meaning the other hat that I have at Love, Serve, Remember Foundation, ramdass.org, we have a wonderful course that's going to be starting at the beginning of October 2nd, I believe, with Alan Watts and Ram Dass, and it's the Dharma of Alan Watts and Ram Dass. And it's extraordinary. It was curated specifically to address certain themes around separateness, around career work and pleasure, and around the balance of the what Alan really represented so strongly in terms of the Tao and the way of things. And then the fourth week is around love and transformation, including a lot around relationships. Really incredible advice from two beings who came from different sides of the mountain, shall we say, in terms of the way they viewed how to tread the spiritual path, and got to the summit and realized it's all one. So it's a great course. Just go to ramdass.org/dharma, DHARMA, and you'll be able to join. And I'm really happy that we're doing this. It's a completely unique event with the two OGs who brought the mystic East to the West. So here we go. I think you'll enjoy this chat with Zach Leary, who just is doing the right thing in terms of spreading the word on the MAPS podcast. So here you go.
Raghu, welcome to the Match Podcast. Pleasure to have you.
Thank you, Zach.
Yeah, it's really great. That
been a while since we did anything like this, so it's great.
Yeah, it has been a long time. Yeah, but we when we just had a kind of a friendly catch-up call a couple of weeks ago, you started off this conversation, which is, a really great thought-provoking topic. You were at Psychedelic Science and kind of ruminating on it, and like in the midst of all of this great advancement in psychedelic assisted therapy, and you said very candidly, well, what about everybody else? There's like a whole huge population. I mean, probably most of the psychedelic population who, maybe that doesn't really apply to, and I can't think of a better way to sort of talk about Ramdass's legacy and influence in psychedelics.
Yeah. Ramdass, how about Richard and Tim?
Richard and Tim.
Yeah, your dad.
Yeah.
Yeah, we were thinking a lot about it, and just we went to MAPS really wanting to represent Ramdass's perspective on psychedelics, not in the sense of therapy for specific things like PTSD, addiction, and death and dying, particularly, and just we had just I don't know if you know this book. It's called LSD. Sidney Cohen and
Sure. Yeah, I know it.
Alpert. Yeah, and then this beautiful photography in it.
Yeah.
So that was just actually re-released earlier this year.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah, it's I don't think much was done to it. Just maybe a little bit reframing and new color picture. Cover picture. But anyhow, it's all exactly what it was that that Tim and Richard put out in terms of setting and integration and outcomes and all of that. So we just thought, we want to be investigating this a little bit more, because for us back then when we started, following Tim and Richard, I keep thinking that. Because it's a weird thing. When I first, I didn't know who Ramdass was, and I had this radio station.
Yeah, in Canada.
PD, in Montreal, that I was a PD for, program director. And they called and said, hey, could you please help us out? We're trying to get an audience into this lecture at McGill University by Ramdass. And I literally said, Ramdass? What's that? I mean, I had some familiarity with Eastern stuff through, psychedelics, basically.
Yeah, but there was so little of it back then. My God, you guys were in the forefront.
There was still, who was it? There was Mayor Baba. There was Alan Watts, right? Yeah, so there were a few people, and who I really listened to was some of the beat poets and so on. Allen Ginsberg was a major upa guru for me.
Yeah.
So anyhow, they said, and I said, well, okay, I don't know who that is. And they said, Tim Leary, Richard Alpert? And I went, shit, I loved them. Yeah, okay, well, send over a lecture or talk of his. You must have something from what he's been doing. He's on tour. And they did, and it was every word. Oh, God, thank God. Somebody's expressing what I couldn't express, but what, is just deeply inside me that wanted to come out. So,
well, I mean, I think that's really kind of one of the magical qualities of Ramdass, among many, but especially in regards to the psychedelic experience, he was really able to articulate it in a way that, others couldn't, which is something not many people can do. You're kind of left speechless, or it's so ephemeral, it's so abstract, but Ramdass could really kind of take you into that experience.
Yeah. Yeah. And in all spheres.
Yeah.
Because he had that great scientific mind, psychology, which is what we were attempting to do in terms of the presentations we did at MAPS. It was what we are moving towards is starting to do more investigation is probably the proper word around science, spirituality, and psychedelic insight. That's our placeholder right now. We're going to start, doing some summits next year. We're just in the planning stages of it all. but it really is about the reality that Ramdas set out, basically the spiritual path.
Yeah.
So much of it was the psychology. Of course, he was an incredible psychologist, but so much of it was based on his psychedelic experiences.
Yeah.
And the experiments that he and Tim did back then, which got them in a whole bunch of hot water and fired. But still, they were real. It was real research in terms of that mystical experience.
Yeah.
The Sunday experiments, whatever that was. With clerical people and other people.
Yeah.
Who absolutely had significant mystical experiences.
Yeah.
So we think that's we want to represent Ramdas's perspective ongoing with this huge burgeoning of incredible new information around psychedelics that can help so many people. Yeah, but what about just regular us Joes? First of all, we all have trauma, so let's not even think that, okay, it's only, you came back from being a soldier and you have PTSD now, so work with ketamine, work with psilocybin and MDMA.
Yeah.
But we all have it. But I think it's more about, we want to sort of get to know, we have the ineffable, right, interconnective experience, which is just the biggest box that we can put in the core of what happens when people ingest a psychedelic. And, so we just want to then investigate what, because at that time when that ineffable experience happens, people have an intention. Okay, I got to find out who is that being when I was on that journey. And I was beyond judging people. I was beyond, feeling shitty about myself, and beyond all of the me that we take on a day-to-day basis. And then suddenly, wow, let's investigate more. So there has to be, to us and to Ramdas, there has to be a way to integrate these experiences in a way that you are working on that on a day-to-day basis. It's not just when you trip.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think if there's any one kind of quality of the psychedelic experience in the 60s and the model that was kind of put forth back then, it was, I think the one thing that was lacking and one thing that we're really kind of getting right today is an emphasis on integration. There wasn't too much talk about that back then. I mean, a little bit. It was starting to kind of rumble, but now there's a real many methodologies for it. There's no one way to do it. And so many people are talking about it. And I think, the work that Ramdas did for all of those decades just ties in so perfectly to it, because really the essence of it, in my opinion, is having some kind of practice that can augment that amazing transformational experience that you went through and apply it to your daily life.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the good thing is when he came back from India, of course, he had that incredible experience of giving his Neem Karoli Baba several hits of white lightning. And now, I don't know if I went through this the other day in another podcast with a friend, but who was at MAPS in Denver. But there was Leonard, I forget his last name, who was incarcerated for many years. Leonard Picard.
Yeah.
He actually knew the dosage of one hit of white lightning.
Wow.
It was like it was huge, 600-700 micrograms. Okay.
Wow.
People now take 50, 75, maybe 100,
The Maharaji just got blasted.
Beyond anything, humanly possible. But, since this human was beyond polarity, it was a very different thing. But his saying at that moment to Ramdas, this is good for beginners. And it gets you into a darshan, they call it, or being in the presence of the light. In his case, he said Christ. But after a couple hours, you got to leave.
You got to come down.
Yeah. And better to love and feed people is what he said in that moment. But all of us were not discouraged from some of the experimentation, even then in India. And one of them was, this is really getting into secrets, I guess. It's not a secret, was ketamine.
Mm.
Back then, of course, we called it horse tranquilizer, you know?
Because it kind of was.
Kind of was, yeah. And actually, Ramdass had a trip with it while we were with him up in the Himalayas doing a meditation course.
Ah,
And I have never seen, because I had a little peephole. It was Indian floors and buildings, it was like shoddy construction. And
right.
there was a little peephole, like a break in the wood. And I could see, because I suddenly started hearing this incredible emotive stuff, sounded like somebody was flying through the universe, like a Marvel comic thing,
And they were.
Surfer. And,
Right.
and he was,
Yeah.
and I couldn't believe it. And he was there with somebody else who was, I don't know if he was guiding or what, but anyhow, this is crazy, but we all went, it was about 25 people living in an ashramic thing. We all went into his room because we heard this incredible noise, these sounds that they were beyond human even, and we all went in and we all touched a different part of his body. We were stoned for a week, Zach.
And what year was that approximately?
Approximately 1971.
That's incredibly early for ketamine use too, for psychedelic ketamine use.
Well, I would,
Hardly.
it was very, well, I don't know. I mean, we were back then I told someone the other day, we used to go to the Carousel Ballroom. It was Bill Graham's before Winterland.
Yeah.
And, it didn't matter who was there. We just went there, and Janice might be there, the who knows,
Right.
And we went there and everybody was there with everything possible. Just stick your tongue out. And we had no idea what it was. And one time they told me, oh yeah, mescaline, which is a, 6-8 hour trip of some sort, It was STP, which I don't think they have. But do you know what STP?
Yeah, I do.
3-day version?
Yeah, it's not really around anymore, thank God. But
that's what happened to me. So all of this was going on, all the time. And so that was. I mean, it's amazing. It shuts down all of the sense doors in a way. That's why it's so valuable therapeutically, because you just, open in an instant to seeing your crazy mind.
Yeah, I mean, and back to, one thing I love so much about the Ramdass model in relationship to psychedelics was, and I tell this story all the time, I told it last night in a talk I gave, was, right before he went to India for the first time, he was living at the Gatehouse in Millbrook and taking LSD every weekend, and was finally just landed on the frustration of that you have to come down. And called Tim up and said, hey, this is not tenable, Tim. We've blown it. Then he goes to India and meets a guy who doesn't come down. But what's interesting about this historically is that, Ramdass didn't stop doing psychedelics entirely. I think it's just, he found a way to, instead of going up and down, found a way to make it sort of more of a lateral exploration. If you're doing all of this, intense sadhana, and have a deep connection to spirit outside of psychedelics, it makes the use of it, much more gentle.
Yeah, and much more integrated, really. It was part of, he was doing it as part of his practices. He wasn't, let's have another, even a ceremony, the repeated experience thing. He cautioned against big time. Yeah, that, yes, okay, we do regular ayahuasca, people do.
Yeah.
Experiences, and each time we do, we seem to pick up some other insight, into the psyche and so on.
Yeah.
But the projection possibilities, because that's all we do all day long, is project from the I place, is humongous. And Ramdass really cautioned against that. That it became a very easy way to be attached to it.
Yeah, being attached to experience, being attached to a method, which is something you always love to talk about. And that, and we do see this a lot in today's movement, kind of the chasing of peak experience.
Yeah.
It's like if you don't stop to kind of extract, these downloads and find a pragmatic way to integrate it into your life, then you're really just chasing peak experiences, right?
Yeah. And we do that. And of course, psychedelics are so powerful.
Yeah.
So there's a great propensity to be caught there. But equally with sex, drugs,
With anything.
anything.
I know them all. Yeah.
We all do.
Yeah.
So, but in reference to this, in terms of ongoing use relative to uncovering who one truly is, so that we can be shall we say, a nicely participating human in the betterment of this very difficult world we are in right now.
This increasingly challenging world that we live in. Yeah. And another thing that I was, in preparation for this podcast, I went back and re-listened to the Here We All Are 1969.
Oh, yeah. That's the lecture I heard when they sent it over.
Oh, okay. Yeah, yeah.
Vancouver, actually.
And I usually don't listen to that era that much. I kind of default to some later stuff. But, it's just so fresh and God, he's just so vibrant, so in it. And it's so potent. But
so stoned.
So stoned too, right? And he's reflecting on the Harvard years, which were pretty just recent at the time. And, reflecting on them getting fired and saying, well, this wasn't proper scientific use because you guys use these drugs as well. Therefore, that doesn't make you an observer. And he said, well, make me data. I'm data. Study me. I'm data. And I love that he was just putting himself out there to be, hey, I'm an example of it too.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the great thing is he did that in every which way. He was really, quote unquote, a Christ of the culture, really. I mean, and being able to be totally honest about where he was. I mean, I remember that in the very beginning. And when I met him, I remember exactly how the relief is okay. I can be a schmagegi. I can, negative thoughts and dark emotions, I don't have to sit here and beat myself up. Wow, okay. And that was a big deal.
Yeah. And I mean, that's a really beautiful sentiment. I mean, one of the qualities I love most about Ramdass is he never tried to hide his humanity, what he would call phony holy.
Yeah.
And I just really just continue to resonate with that quality of him so much as he just really put his humanity into the teachings as well and using it as kind of a working model. What do you think kind of kept him in that space of doing that?
He really followed the instructions of love everyone, serve everyone, remember God, and tell the truth, which came from Neem Karoli, Bob.
Yeah.
Really, the reality of, especially around service, is what I think is the main ingredient here. Because when you do anything in compassion for another soul, in any way, smallest ways, lifting groceries for someone who needs help, all the way to sitting with people who are dying. The reality is that you stop thinking about yourself in that moment. Yep. It's what His Holiness the Dalai Lama calls a selfish compassion, something like that, selfish altruism. It seems completely, at opposite ends, but the truth is that when you do it, you are getting benefit by doing this. Ramdass realized that early on and did many things to initiate that in himself so he could work with it. He can see where there's, kind of bullshit about you're doing something and it's really motivated by some gain or some notoriety or whatever. We all have these things going on all the time. So he did, but that's a way to work with it. It's not like you're going to go, you can't wait till you're completely clean to do some service in this social action, right?
Well, you'll probably never get clean.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah. So you do them. You operate on both planes at the same time. And he did that. And I think, especially when he lived in Maui.
Yeah, I agree with that. I totally and really.
Yeah, you were there a lot. So
yeah, I was there a lot, and I just really saw the embodiment of that. So many things really fell into place. One, that you guys really kind of took over and put an emphasis on his health, I think, even post-stroke, but when he was still on the mainland, there were a lot of health issues, and he could see, this wasn't really working. It wasn't sustainable. And when he really got to just kind of be in just the embodiment of what ramdass is supposed to be, free from, well, he couldn't be completely free from all the distractions because his situation was his situation, but it kind of just created this platform for him just to really just be ramdass. Extraordinary.
Fierce Grace, they made a movie.
Fierce Grace.
And but in the beginning he thought it was, the guru gave me a stroke. And it's like, went and saw Siddhima, which everybody is a saint that's like our Indian mother and was close to Maharaji forever.
Yeah.
And he went to see her and hello, she said, are you crazy? She didn't say it like that. That gives you stroke. It gives you the ability to transform yourself in relation to the suffering. And so that happened, absolutely happened in Maui. And every time I say Maui, by the way, as we just started bringing that up.
Yeah.
Folks, whenever this comes out, this podcast on Maps by Zach.
Absolutely.
God, what has happened over there is just, it's impossible to even think of. It's just the extraordinary suffering.
Yeah.
Anybody, if it's in you, somebody told me the other day, actually, the Red Cross, I would have thought Red Cross, such an established, it seems, or I thought they'd be archaic in terms of their ability to deliver what they receive mostly to what's needed,
right.
Which is always a problem with these big. But I was told by people on Maui, they're the most efficient use of taking the money, donations, and converting it to get it to where people.
Okay. That's really good information. Yeah. A lot of these nonprofits, the ratio of dollar that actually goes to action is low, but that's really good information. And for the Ramdass satsang is, well, if you know, but where the Lahaina is very close to where the Ramdass retreats take place and taken place for the last 12 years. And
so it's hitting us pretty hard because we spend so much time there.
Yeah.
But anyhow, that's a little bit of a side trip here.
But support Maui relief. Yeah.
Yeah.
But speaking of Maui and secrets, and it's not so much a secret because I do talk about it now and then. Now, I'm not positive it was the last one. I don't know, but it probably was within the last few, I think, or maybe the last couple. But I had the distinct pleasure of doing mushrooms with ramdass and pretty low dose. It wasn't a super high dose, but I think 2011 when Dasima was away. and
scare taker.
Yeah, it's kept Dasima.
Cats away, the mice.
Exactly. And it was, yum, 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 yum. We just sat around the pool, looked at the flowers and chanted a lot of ram, 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 ram. But it was so extraordinary. For me personally, the kind of weird thing about it was all I wanted to do was talk about Maharaji, in that space, we were kind of gelled, and just the colors were so, all I wanted to do was talk about Maharaji. All Ramdass wanted to do was talk about Tim. And we were kind of caught in this polarity. And I'm like, oh goodness, I don't want to talk about Tim. But he really, and I just bring that up because it was, truly one of the most extraordinary experiences of my life, no doubt. But that reverence that he had for Tim, it really remained true. For long.
I'd love to. Do you have any more remembrance of some of the things he might have said about Tim?
Yeah,
their relationship.
Yeah, one, I think there was this sort of air. I'm not starting off negative, but I think at that time anyway, Tim had a little degree of homophobia to him, in the early 60s. And there was a little bit of kind of, weird brotherly kind of tension around there. But I really think that, what I remember the most is that Tim really inspired Ramdass to just not give a fuck, like just to take these huge risks, Tim was just like, this professor down the hall without an assistant sitting in the smallest office in the department who was just this wild-eyed madman, essentially. And that really kind of jarred Ramdas into like, hey, let's just go for it. Let's live our dharma. Let's just throw it all on the table, and Ramdas, up until that point was pretty buttoned up and was, into the plane and the motorcycle and all of the antiques and, and that seemed to really be like kind of like the quality that he was remembering was that, wow, Tim really just inspired me to be me,
Sounds like Alan Watts also.
Yeah.
I say that because we're working on a course, a 4-week online course with Ramdas and Alan Watts.
And is it? Tell me about the format of that. Is that based on
recordings that we have
of them together or separate?
No, separate.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean Ramdas recounts some really wild stories about them getting drunk together and all that.
Yeah,
but it's the presence of the way, and it's the dharma of Alan Watts and Ramdas, and how they come from completely separate points of view, perspectives, obviously, but they meet at the summit, and it's kind of similar to Tim and Ramdas, actually.
Yeah, I think so. I would kind of agree with that. But I think Tim really had kind of an immediate sort of disdain for kind of organized spirituality and anything.
Yeah, oh yeah, that's mild. Yeah, yeah.
Where Alan didn't.
Yeah. No, that's true. Well, Alan, he didn't. He says a lot about the bullshit around that. So there's a lot of similarities there. But no, I just think that when you watch. So everybody out there, I'm sure Zach has talked about this before, but Dying to Know, the film with his dad, Tim, and Ramdas had come along. They filmed him being with Tim, weeks before he died, months, I'm not quite sure, something like that.
About 3 months, yeah.
About 3 months. So anyhow, all I'm trying to say is when I say meets at the summit, in that film, you see that more clearly than any other place, any of their previous written stuff together, audio, whatever it was. That love.
Yeah.
You visibly saw the way that they shared that love.
Yeah.
Unconditionally. So that's what I mean about the summit.
Yeah, you really see the way that they shared that love. And to me, like when I go back and watch that film too, while I personally ended up, I guess the irony in my personal life was that I took the path of Ramdas more than I did.
And
for whatever reasons, but that there was still a lot of similarities between the two of them. They took different roads, but kind of sort of circled back, and I found that they had much more in common than they did apart. I don't know, maybe because I knew them both so well, but I really picked that up from watching that.
Yeah, I think one of the things is curiosity. And both that was a real tying together of these two men, was having a healthy curiosity.
Yeah.
And Tim introduced, well, let's not be too afraid to nourish that curiosity, shall we say?
Yeah, almost to a fault.
Yeah, almost to a fault. So I think that that's also important, and it's part of what we, in terms of us representing Ramdas's perspective and our own through the foundation, being in respect to psychedelics and how people can really utilize them as a tool, as an opening to get further and further into self-awareness and mindfulness, which is highly important. I mean, people become, after, I think maybe you can respond to this, but a major thing around people having a journey, even some microdosing might even count for part of this, I think. But what it is that you become more connected to that curiosity.
Yeah.
You become more willing to look inside and not afraid of it. And you get that wonderful hit from the psychedelic. And sometimes it's not a wonderful hit, but it gives you some real fodder for dealing with you.
Wonderful or not, it does spark a sense of curiosity. Even if it's challenging, it can be the most rewarding, insight into your behaviors, into your patterns, positive or not. It definitely sparks that.
Yeah. So these two men, they definitely espoused that and
lived
that and lived it. And courage was also, and that's what you were really, Ramdass got from Leary. I mean, Richard got from Leary way back in the day to, not taking himself so seriously. And
yeah, and also, this other kind of quality to them too. They both, they really, either of them really were never afraid to keep evolving and keep kind of upgrading kind of the versions of themselves. They never rested on their greatest hits. They didn't rest on, tune in, turn on, drop out, or be here now. They kept kind of just growing and growing and growing in this incredible sense of, what we call in our community, dharma and purpose, but this work ethic that was just so phenomenal,
Yeah.
I mean, Ramdass, just extraordinary.
Comes out of caring. I mean, and you go back to when we talked about where Ramdass ended up in Maui, where he ended up in terms of perspective of truly paying attention to people. I mean, you saw it. People walk in the house and he'd be completely. It's like the first time I met him. It just was a field of, okay, what can I do for you? I don't care about Richard or Ramdass or any. That's not relevant right now. And opened up into that. So people trust. That's the next thing that happens. That's another thing when we talk about the relevance of psychedelics. Obviously, creating curiosity, creating an ineffable experience, creating the giving you the interconnectivity of everything. I mean, these are all incredible things to be able to use on a day-to-day basis.
And when you say trust, tell me more about that. What do you mean trust in what?
Oh, there's a good story. We were in Maui, we were at a retreat and teaching and so on. And I was with Ramdass and facilitating one thing or another with him. And we started talking about trust. I guess it was part of the theme of the retreat, trust. Exactly what you just said. What do you mean by trust?
It could go so many ways. Yeah.
Yeah. So I said, look, as far as trust, when I first met you, meaning Ramdass, okay, I just said what I just mentioned to you. It was just a field of complete unconditionality, where letting go into that moment was not difficult whatsoever. And I can only ascribe it to a deep, deep trust. I wouldn't go, faith is a religious thing. I mean, it's kind of a hard word, but trust, we all know. I mean, there's basic trust. And in this case, it was trust in our own intuition. And that, so I said, Ramdass, so it was you who I initially opened up trust. And I said to him, what about you? What was your first experience with trust? And he looked at me and he went, mushrooms.
It's great. It's a great story. But yeah, when you're kind of juxtaposing trust and intuition, I mean, I don't know, Raghu, you've been doing these practices for a really long time now. Not to date you or anything, but but you've been doing them for quite a while now. What do you think is that core kind of method that you fall back on, or that core kind of tool that you use to kind of really trust in your intuition and not the monkey mind, and distinguishing between the two?
Well, it's been Vipassana meditation is one major insight meditation. It's called just using the breath. And then it graduates to insight into the reality of impermanence, basically. And that is a way to get behind that monkey mind, absolutely. Mm-hmm. And this has been many of us, when we were with Neem Karoli Baba, he'd say, "Are you going to the course?" It was like, how do we get rid of these people, these fucking hippies? And so he would say that, but all of us did. It became a foundational practice. And then, of course, that combined with mindfulness really allows you to see your motivations, your self-interest, your self-cherishing, as the Buddhists call it. Without that, I can't see how people operate from this judging mind, from the I. You're a stinker. What are you thinking? And oh God, you're so and the judgment on top of it. I mean, it's just a horrible, like being in an echo chamber.
Yeah.
And it then makes people really unhappy, and so again, back to the psychedelics give you a glimpse.
Yeah.
We are connected. We are not separate.
Yeah.
Right? There is a something, we can't name it, but completely experienced it, that, the words that we have constructed over time, God and Buddha mind, whatever, they all don't really say it because it can't be said. So, but when you have this powerful experience, then you realize there is a rudder that I can aim for in terms of moving out of the self-centered, separate individual. And so meditative
absolutely.
practice, mindfulness, but there's plenty. There's chanting, there's mantra repetition, there's doing diaries, journals, you can go on and on and on, retreats, whatever it is.
There's a lot of methods these days.
A lot of, it's beautiful. And of course, they're all available in an instant.
Yeah, they are. And another commonality too that I find between all the methods really, but between psychedelics and bhakti specifically, are that kind of that sense of sort of honing in on your intuition and your own divinity within you, but that sense that discovery that it's been there all along, but I forgot for whatever reason. Because my ego is so strong, my addictions are so strong, whatever it is, but I forget. We're quick forgetters. And these methods really help us, or help me, speaking for myself, to not forget as much.
Yeah. Yeah, and when you forget and you realize it, you do as Sri Aurobindo said, you fall in the mud, you pick yourself up, first your hands, and then get up your knees and stand up again and keep moving. Or Sharon, our dear friend, Sharon Salzberg, who says the beauty of us as humans is we can start over. So like even just you're caught, you've been thinking about some fantasy while you're meditating for 5 minutes or something, not completely gone. And then you go, oh my God, I'm an idiot. I can't believe I can't even keep focus on a breath. And then, but that is the way we pile on ourselves too. Once that happens, you go, yeah. And also I told that person something terrible and next, and you just pile on. Yeah, no, the reality is just remember, we can come back.
We can come back, and even on on a larger macro sense, if you go through a personal tragedy or trauma or whatever it is, and grief, loss, addiction, suffering, deep suffering, you can start over, you can rebuild.
Yeah, that's extraordinarily important to have that in the arsenal, for sure. And that can only happen and be real, unfortunately, like anything. Tennis, I love tennis, so you got to practice. You cannot just go out there and think that you'll have a real interaction with somebody without practicing.
Oh my goodness, ain't that the truth, man? Goodness gracious. I've started hitting, I played baseball when I was younger, hardball, and I've started going back to the batting cage, and it's like, oh shit, You can't jump back in again. But one other thing I wanted to ask, I think in December it's going to be 4 years since RD left his body, right? 4 or 5?
Yeah.
4?
But it's going to be 4.
4. Okay. Yeah, that's created a little bit of, distance from him being in his body and around, and you kind of, so immersed and enmeshed in, the living state of ramdass and where he's going to be and what's he going to do. What do you have any different kind of thoughts on his legacy and core message now that might have been a little bit different than, say, 10 years ago? Or is it just kind of the same, but just more solidified?
Well, for us, of course, it evolved again in Maui, very much so. We're talking about all these practices. We have to probably mention to the audience, Ramdass's biggest teaching, rather. Everyone thinks be here now. And yeah, it was still going on. Be here now. He was still very much talking about just being in the present moment all through till he died. But the other thing that was really powerful was a meditation called I Am Loving Awareness. And basically just getting out of the story you tell yourself in your head, the I that judges everything, and moving through the breath, just taking some deep breaths into the center of one's chest, the spiritual heart, as they call it. And I am loving awareness, and just expanding a kind of heat in that area as you breathe into it. So you really do move out of this crazy mind that just wants to control everything. So that powerful teaching was kind of the culmination of his teaching career, if you want to call it that. And I think, and you well know it because he was doing it for a number of years before he left. And I think that contribution is extraordinary. And we, in the retreats that we're doing with people, in-person retreats, we are constantly referring back to both of those. They're like bookends. Be here now, loving awareness. And that is how this whole thing continues to move forward. And obviously, like doing this course with Alan Watts, just going in and just moving from his perspective, Ramdass, to Alan's perspective, that just shines a light in a completely different way, as we mentioned before, and this similarly to Tim and Ramdass. So, but these are bookends. Yeah, this is just a new thought. I love it. Be here now, loving awareness,
and 50 years apart.
Yeah,
almost.
Yeah,
yeah, and you've and I'd be curious to see like how the Alan Watts course kind of shakes out, and you're going to be doing some more kind of psychedelically kind of summits and stuff like that.
Kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think one extraordinary thing about the role that you've played in Love, Serve, Remember is that, you have done this amazing job of archiving Ramdass's work, whereas prior it was kind of, all over the place and various disorganized kind of.
No, but they didn't have a cloud back then.
Yeah. So, do you see Ramdass's work as kind of going in different sort of phases and evolutions and moving away from one thing, going back to another, revisiting an old concept, starting a new concept? Because there's a lot of teachings out there, 50 years worth.
Yeah. It's kind of, it's called to action in terms of how we mine this incredible catalog. And we haven't even, we're just about to get to offering people a way to get into the retreats that he did in Maui for those 15 years or so. It's called by what's happening. The actual, I'll give you a good example. We did a course, and then it was around heartfulness, which is, that's if we got bookends of loving awareness and be here now, what fills the space is heartfulness.
Heartfulness. Okay.
Heartfulness, yeah. Which is ramdass, He gave a shit about it, everyone and everything, or especially by the time he got to Maui.
Yeah.
But we asked people, what is it that is top on your list of what you would like to have teachings from ramdass, basically? And they wrote back, you know what? A lot of it was around how do I even take step one to creating a practice and a perspective for myself that allows me to not be completely caught in my life, basically.
Mhm.
Those, and there was a few other things, but those were a couple of things. So ramdass has it in spades in terms of that kind of advisal. So we get the calling from people, and we fulfill it the best we can. We have some great people who know how to mind the cattle.
Yeah. And speaking of the calling, I mean, I'm just so happy to hear about these kind of psychedelically oriented summits that you guys are going to be doing, because I do think in the last 10, 15 years of his life, he certainly talked about psychedelics, but it wasn't as much of a focus, so yeah, tell me.
Wasn't anything though,
Yeah,
right? He
there
didn't
were
talk that much. I mean, the beauty was hanging out with him, and he wasn't necessarily going on.
yeah, it wasn't much, but yeah, tell our listeners a little bit about what these psychedelic summits are going to be, who's going to be there, what's the format.
Well, we haven't gone that far yet, but I mean,
Oh,
obviously there are well, let's start. We're going to ask Rick.
of course.
Rick, if you're listening, we're going to ask you to come and join us. But and Rick has a real relationship with ramdass. And, some of there's what we're trying to do is bring together, when we talk about science, so there's the science of spirituality. There's the how science has, with Richie Davidson and other people, they've really, Dalai Lama's been involved. They've really proven out these meditative states that are exemplified, particularly in the Tibetan tradition, and they have the context for it. They're proving it out. It's real. So there's a substantiation by virtue of science that is on one level. Then there's, you take the science of breath work, for instance. There's a real science of breath work that shows that not just for consciousness, but for health. And there was a great book on the breath. I did a podcast with somebody on Mindrolling that it's so effective. It's incredible. So there are people out there that they really carry the ball from the science level of it and from the spirituality side, and particularly around Tony Bossis.
Love Tony. Yeah.
I mean, he's wonderful. He has such a huge heart.
Yeah.
That's what we're talking about, bringing people together and in that way, he's completely wide open. So they're like wide open to basically the two traditions, and being able to use the mind as a servant, shall we say, as Ramdas used to say, the mind, the ego is a bad master, but a good servant.
Yeah.
If we can get it into that, so we want to bring that to the table.
Okay.
Alongside of, people that have really gone into the kind of work that therapy work, but not necessarily with what Rick and many of and Tony and all these people are doing, which is working to see the efficacy, in particular, of these entheogens with PTSD and these other, and working particularly on that in a scientific study.
Yeah.
We're more interested, not more interested, that's BS, but we'd like to present Ramdass's view, which is how do you integrate that into your daily life? And that's the central premise.
Yeah.
How do we nourish the sense of awe, wonderment that comes along with the psychedelic experience? How do we then, what are we kind of adding into the mix in terms of saying, here's where you can go once you have this experience. Here's where you can go to nourish it on a day-to-day basis, nurture it. So that's a central premise. I mean, we're going to have a lot more stuff around neuroscience and the ability of the brain to actually change, and we can convert our habitual patterns. Really?
Yeah. It's possible. It's happening.
Yeah.
It's happening. Oh, fantastic. Good. And that's a fantastic update. I love it. And I know that our listeners will love it too.
Yeah, well, you'll be there too.
I'd love to. Yeah. Yeah, Raghu, thank you so much for coming on the MAPS podcast. It's great to see you. Long overdue.
Yeah, really, really. Zach and I haven't been in touch over the pandemic. And so, it's really wonderful. And I thank you. And by the way, the movie we were talking about, you got to mention it, Dying to Know, is being made into a book. So actually, it's kind of interesting the way you can really linger. Whereas the movies go, boo, 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 you read a paragraph. Oh, wait a minute, that's interesting. Go back.
Some of the photos, my gosh, man, they're just fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah, no, really great.
Well, Raghu, thank you so much, brother.
Thank you.